Hello, everybody. Welcome to FIG Academy online seminar series in 2024. My name is Hiroaki Sato. I'm a member of the FIG Education Commission. So today, I am very excited to invite Jeff Thomson, a first Vice President of FIG Men's Technical Committee. He also plays a very, very important role in FIG Safeguarding Commission. He's a university lecturer, and he has over 25 years of experience as a professional men's artistic gymnastics coach. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you very much, Hiro. I'm very honored and very proud to be able to take part in this. And when I received your email, I was so excited to be able to take part in such an important seminar with you.
So today's topic is the athlete-centered approach. Very important topic to be discussed. So please go ahead, Jeff. I'm really looking forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you again. The topic of athlete-centered, I think, is extremely important. In the contemporary sports world that we have today, there has been a shift, a seismic shift, one could say, even from the idea that the coach had complete control of the athlete and their career. Whereas today, and it's a very healthy development, we are looking at making sure the athlete feels they have a major role to play in their career, because after all, it is they who are performing. The approach I will take with my presentation is to talk about the concept of athlete-centeredness in a general way and to speak about the different groups that are involved in that, both the coach, the athlete, and the administration. And I believe after that, Hiro, you will be able to speak well about your experience as such a high-level coach and how you have taken that philosophy and use it with great success in your personal coaching. So let me begin. It now gives me great pleasure to begin my presentation on the concept of being athlete-centered. Being athlete-centered. Being athlete-centered is really about being and embodying exactly what it means to put first and foremost in your mind what is best for the gymnast. To be in a state of being is what that means. And I know that that sounds quite philosophical, but it's very important as a coach, I believe, to have a sound philosophical basis for every decision that you make. It can also be defined as an embodiment, a personification, or an essence of what you do. And when you see a coach who's working with athletes who truly is athlete-centered, you just recognize it in their every action and in their every word. Therefore, to be truly athlete-centered, the philosophy must be who you are as a coach and guide your every decision and action. As this slide indicates, with a visual cue for you, we can see that the athlete is in the middle of not just a coach, but of many different groups, organization, and people who are necessary in order for that athlete to achieve their potential. It's quite deliberate that we see in this diagram, and this diagram is seen in many coach education courses. The coach is at the top, and that's a very important consideration to have. Coaches will spend many, many decades of their lives working through many generations of athletes, and they are, of course, in many, many ways, the expert, the one that knows what needs to be done in order to achieve the goals that the athlete has set for themselves. So when we think of athlete-centered, it doesn't necessarily mean that the athlete makes all of the decisions. What it means is that they work very, very closely with their coach to take all the steps necessary to achieve the goals that they've defined for themselves together with their coach. In this circle of support around the athlete, we also have our regional or our national sporting bodies. So this can be your province or state plus your country. Then you have a group of sports science and medicine people that will be there for you to provide you with information, to do prehab, to do rehab, whatever is necessary to keep that athlete healthy, psychological support as well. You have your National Olympic Committee, which obviously you must work with very closely to achieve the qualification standards, for example, that they would require for you to be able to go to the Olympic Games. And then as so many of our athletes in gymnastics are quite young, so they're still dealing with school, some of them going to university, then you have to manage your relationship with the schools and speak with those universities, speak with those schools, speak with their teachers to make sure that that athlete is understood by their teachers, is understood by their schools, and they understand the unique needs of a high-performance athlete. We have the parents, an incredibly important role. Obviously, they're the ones that are there day in and day out with the athlete, just like their coach. And officials and judges, and this is quite a unique part of gymnastics that's critical. As a judge sport, the coach must work very closely with officials and judges to know what that athlete must do to achieve the maximum score and to minimize their deduction. Athlete-centered coaching is a coaching philosophy underpinned by a set of values and coaching behaviors where the primary goal of the coach is to help their athletes take responsibility of their sporting behaviors that create their results. It's about the athletes taking responsibility and ownership over their performance. And this is where the goal setting that I mentioned in the last slide is critical. If an athlete tells you that their goal is to go to the Olympic Games and to win gold medals, as a coach and as all of those other people that surround that athlete, a number of things start to have to happen that if they don't happen, means that that goal may well be unattainable. And so once the goal setting process is finished and you sit down with that athlete to say, okay, are you prepared to do everything that's necessary to achieve your own stated goal? That's when the heart-to-heart conversations have to happen. I've seen it often in my personal coaching career where I would have an athlete say, I really want to make the world championship team. And I would say, okay, are you prepared to train 5 days a week, 4 to 5 hours each time? And they will simply say to me, no, I can't do that. And I said, that's fine. Let's go back and relook at your goals. Let's revisit your goals. Because if the goals aren't reasonable and attainable for your life, then you're just setting yourself up for failure and for disappointment. And so once the athlete knows what is necessary to achieve their goal, then they need to take the responsibility and ownership over doing everything that is necessary to actually achieve that goal. So being athlete-centered means that every decision and every action that is taken by anyone within that support structure surrounding an athlete must ask themselves a very simple fundamental question. Is what I am about to say going to add positively in any way to the athlete's performance? Every word and every action has an impact. Make it a positive impact. And I've heard many good examples of this, and one from a friend of mine who was the coach of gold medalists in synchronized swimming and who came to work with us in gymnastics. And she would often overhear our coaches talking to the athletes about the score that they just received and how it wasn't a good score and how the judges weren't giving them the score they felt they deserved. And you could see the effect that that had on the athlete was not one that had a positive impact on the gymnast. And I remember her saying this so clearly to the coaches, and all of the coaches looking at themselves thinking, yes, why am I bringing that up? Why am I talking about something that may or may not even be true? But it's certainly negative, and it's not helping them feel more positive about their performance. It's not helping them get ready for the next routine or the next competition. So ask yourself every single time you speak to the gymnast, is what I'm about to say going to have a positive impact or not? And now I would love to share a quote that was given to me by my good friend now, Aliash Pegan, who is the horizontal bar world champion and the FIG Athletes Commission president. He said to me, I trusted and believed in my coach completely. I knew that everything he did was to try and make me the best gymnast I could possibly be. When I was young, of course, he made many of the decisions, but as I became older, I was included in more and more of the decisions about my training and competitions. By trusting him and working together, I became better than I ever imagined, and I became the world champion. And this is sometimes where a misconception happens around the concept of being athlete-centered. Because the coach has so much experience, because the coach has so much education, they have to build a relationship around trust so that when they say to their gymnast, you need to do this, the gymnast, they can question it. The coach will be able to give them an answer that makes sense to them. But ultimately, in the end, it is the coach who probably knows what it is that needs to be done better than their athlete because they have all of that experience and all of that education. Something that's changed very, very much over the past few decades is that at least now we have this back and forth conversation that Aliash mentions. How initially when you're young, not so much discussion and dialogue back and forth, and as you get older, you share. The idea of a dictatorial style of coaching simply doesn't work, especially with the modern generation of young people that we have today. And another slide just to reinforce the point that I just made. The athlete is at the center, but the coach is at the top. And the expression that's often used, it's athlete-centered, coach-driven, and administratively supported. It means that the decisions are for the athlete, but the coach does a lot of the driving of that and goes to those administrative people, whether that's sports science, regional or national sport bodies, Olympic committees, etc. Goes to them and makes sure that the jobs that need to happen in those various areas are done so that athlete working with their coach can achieve their goals. And something that's really critical here is that every person in the structure needs to only focus on their area of expertise and not go outside their scope of practice. Every coach who's watching this presentation will very well know that they've had parents talk to them about what they think their child should be doing in the training environment, even if they themselves were never a gymnast or maybe never an athlete. And when you start to have people leaving their area of expertise, you can have a real breakdown in the system that needs to be functioning properly. For example, sports science and medicine. I've seen instances where the physiotherapist starts to take on a role of almost a psychologist with the athlete. But if that's not their area of expertise, they shouldn't go down that road. And all of these different people around need to respect and appreciate that they have a key role to play in helping that athlete achieve their potential, but stay within your scope of practice. Focus on what you know best. And if you do want to understand what the other people are doing in those other bubbles, talk to them, talk to the coach, but keep within your scope at all times. So athletes cannot do it alone. It does take a community. It takes a community whose primary focus is what's in the best interest of the athlete. What do they need to achieve the goals that they've set in conjunction with their coach? The coach then drives that process, and the administration around that will support them. So this simple slide is just another way to look at that relationship and how it interacts between the athlete, the coach, and all of those other components that encircle an athlete. So, as Aliesh mentioned, it was all about trust between him and his coach. And what is trust? Trust is a firm belief in the character, ability, strength, or truth of someone or something. Without that trust in the people in the organizations, it's virtually impossible to achieve the highest level of competitive results in sport. Trust is one of the very hardest things to build. It seems that human nature we're always a little bit skeptical. And so it's hard to build, and it's exceptionally easy to destroy. So the coach, all of those other groups and organizations, at all times must be honest, but kind. There's ways to say things to help an athlete that might be hard for them to hear, but there's no need to do that in a way which is hurtful. If you're willing to stand up and say something the athlete might not want to hear, you will in fact actually build trust. But if you do it in a way that undermines their self-confidence, their self-esteem, you'll destroy that trust, and you'll destroy it very, very quickly. This is one of the reasons why organizations, for example, in terms of understanding this overall construct, the transparency that needs to exist in all the selection policies, in the competitions, in the officiating, all of these things act together to develop and build trust. So throughout the previous slides, I've mentioned over and over again goals. And I think in this lecture, it's important to understand how goals should be set. And there's a very good acronym for that, at least in English, called SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T. And it's about collaboration and working together to create those SMART goals. So the first thing is that they have to be specific. They have to be clearly written. My goal is to place third at such and such a competition, for example, very specific. Then it also has to be measurable. And this is more difficult in things outside of actual competitive performance. When it comes to improvements in areas of psychological confidence, it's much more difficult to measure that. But you need to find, and there are tools where you can observe and track and measure those areas of improvement as well. And attainable. Attainable, too often I think we see, especially with young athletes, that they'll set an incredibly high goal, and perhaps their training environment, their coach, even their location in the world means that it's highly unlikely that that goal could be attainable. You have to have the appropriate training resources and coaching support provided. And when I started coaching, I was in a very, very small town. We had no full-time gym. We had no pits. And I would have gymnasts that would speak to me about wanting to go to the Olympics, and they would want to talk about winning medals. And as kindly as I could, I would have to say to them that within our training environment, that goal was probably not attainable. But if that was their goal, then perhaps they needed to consider moving, going somewhere else, whatever it would take to make that a possibility. And realistic, this is within the reach of the athlete's current level of performance. When you know your athlete is doing, for example, a certain skill by a certain period of time, and your goal is for them to do a much more difficult skill in, let's say, 1 year or 2 years, if they're not doing that baseline skill now, you can't expect it to be realistic that they will do that much more difficult skill in a short period of time. So you have to backward plan and say, if that's the kind of routine you want to do, that's the kind of skill you want to do, then let's look at this realistically and say, what could you actually do safely, consistently to achieve the highest possible score? So the realistic component there is something that must be dealt with. A lot of gymnasts, of course, they're big thinkers, they're dreamers, and they imagine doing the most difficult skills. And your job as a coach is to help to shape their ideals and to say, that's great, it's wonderful that you're thinking so high, but let's be realistic about this. Do you really think we have enough time to achieve that before the next selection competition or main event that's coming up? Then setting time. Have a due date for whatever your goals are. If you don't do that, then what are you measuring against? It could just go on, and you almost have an excuse, if you will, to not have achieved your goal. Well, we didn't really know when we were going to do it. Set the date and work consistently towards it. These goals determine the program that must be followed, and I alluded to that earlier. If you set a high goal, then basically everything that you need to do is determined by that, and everything that you don't do, everything that you don't do means that it's less and less likely you'll achieve that goal. This is where the coach has to come in and give you these specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. Something that's also links into everything that we've been saying about athlete-centered goes far beyond just the performance aspect and the goal attainment that they might have. My proudest moment in many ways as a coach has been the fact that I've still remained friends with many of my athletes. And when I speak to the high-performance athletes that I've been honored to get to know through my position on the FIG, many of them talk about how close they all are still with their coach to this day. And I think that happens for a large part because the coach is also dedicated to the holistic well-being of that athlete. They think of them first and foremost as a person. Sure, they look at competence. This is the sport-specific technical, tactical, and performance skills, but it's also their overall health, their general fitness, and their physical well-being. It's if you are constantly training with injuries and psychological problems and your coach isn't working with you to manage those and eliminate or remove them, that's not going to build a healthy, well-rounded relationship in the long run. And I think confidence, sport is perhaps the greatest tool that we have to build self-confidence in people, a self-belief, resilience, mental toughness, and a sense of positive self-worth. The power coaches have to shape a person's sense of self and their self-belief, their self-esteem, and their self-confidence is enormous. And many studies have indicated that of all of the interactions a person might go through in their life with teachers, parents, grandparents, etc., the coach has the most influential role to play. So as a coach, if you think about that responsibility, that massive responsibility that you have, that you're going to shape the mental well-being of that child, that person for the rest of their life, then you'll start to consider what are the things that you're saying and doing on a day-to-day basis. Then there's connection. These are the interpersonal skills, the ability to build and sustain meaningful and positive relationships. It's wonderful to go to so many different countries and you see these reunions that happen where all of the old gymnasts from that country come into the arena to watch the competition. They socialize together. And the social aspect of sport sometimes is easy to overlook, but it's critical for the development of that child in the holistic sense. Knowing how to build relationships, maintaining those relationships, and having positive relationships throughout your whole lifetime can be learned and developed in sport. Character. We all know those athletes who show respect for the sport and for their competitors, their respect for sport and others. They have integrity, they show self-discipline, and their ethical and moral decision-making is above question. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head except for one where I remember very well after the 92 Olympics when Vitaly Sherbo spoke about the pommel horse results and how he, of course, was happy to win the gold medal, but he thought he should have shared that gold medal with another gymnast because, in his opinion, the routine was as good. And I remember thinking, that's an amazing person, an amazing athlete to be able to stand in front of a television camera and say, I'm grateful for this gold medal, but there's another person out there that also deserves to share it with me. And this shows such a respect for sport and is an incredible example to others that follow. So we come back around to where I began with that concept of being, to really be athlete-centered in your actions. Really what we're talking about is being human-centered. We are dealing with human beings with hopes, aspirations, fears, and our job is to guide them through life and to develop into good human beings through their experience in gymnastics. And I'm not sure if Dr. Keith Russell was the one who originated this next quote, but it was the first one I heard it from. And he said it one time, and it was very impactful on me as a coach. We train tissue. We train tissues like muscles, ligaments, tendons, but we coach people. We're helping people through life. We're guiding them through life. We're helping them to be the best person that they can be. An enormous responsibility. And I truly believe what I said earlier, that sport is the best place for that to happen. And I came across this beautiful quote that I often use when I speak about safeguarding and coaching ethics. Where did we ever get the crazy idea that in order to make children do better, first we have to make them feel worse? Think of the last time you felt humiliated or treated unfairly. Did you feel like cooperating or doing better? If you work positively with your athletes, you develop trust and love, they will work for you out of respect and admiration for you, not out of fear. So just to summarize very quickly, I think the first thing is that the athlete must feel included, respected, and empowered in that relationship. The coach must be recognized and supported as the expert. And the administration must recognize that their role is to support the athlete and their coach and provide the resources required to achieve success. It's only when all of those things happen together that the magic happens and athletes achieve greatness. As is often the case, sometimes a good quote can provide as much information as an entire lecture. And these are some of the quotes that I quite like. A good coach will make his players see what they can be rather than what they are. And this, again, is something that Aliash has spoken to me about, how his coach had a vision for him that he helped instill, and together they rose up to that point where he could become one of the greatest high bar champions of all time. A coach is someone who can give correction without causing resentment. So much of the message can be lost if the delivery of the message comes across in a way which is humiliating or demeaning. Corrections are given and should be given in such a way that the athlete knows that your intent is to help them be better. That's the only reason that you're supplying some correction. It's not a power trip. It's not trying to show them you know more. It's just about helping them on their journey. And perhaps one of the most famous quotes, many of you will have seen this before, is that behind every fearless player is a fearless coach. He refused to let them be anything but the best that they can be. All coaches, myself included, have had those days where the gymnast is just not there. They're even thinking of quitting. And you have to be brave as a coach. You have to stick with them. You have to work with them through that process when they're having their self-doubt, and go with them forward in that journey to help them achieve the goal that deep down in their heart they still know they want to achieve, even on their worst of days. I want to thank you all very much for listening to my lecture about being athlete-centered, and I hope that in some small way it might add to your journey and improve your practice as a coach. I particularly want to thank the FIG for this opportunity to present with someone who's a real hero to me as a coach, Hiro-san, coach of the great Kohei Uchimura. And I use this small picture, this small slide in all of my classes where I teach. This is the excitement, the kind of intensity of excitement that gymnasts should have, that athletes should have, their desire, their love to want to be in the gym, something they look forward to every day because they know they're going to be with that person, with you, their coach, who cares so much about helping them on their journey to greatness. Thank you very much.
Oh, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much, Jeff. I was really totally amazed by your presentation, and what you said carried a lot of weight because you're such an experienced, men's technical committee vice president and also the professional gymnastics coach. So I learned a lot from you. So I have a few questions just came up. So if you don't mind, can I ask you a few questions?
Of course, I'm very happy to answer as many questions as you may have.
So the first question is, in your presentation, you said that every word and every action has an impact, make a positive one. So to be able to make a positive impact on the gymnast life, how can we what sort of things we have to consider? And do you have any advice or tips? Because it is easy to say, but hard to do. So any advice and tips? Maybe it's a broad and difficult question, but from your perspective, do you have any advice?
It is a broad question, but really it's probably the most important question because it's such an important topic, and it becomes almost a part of your life when you coach with this kind of open mentality. The first, I want to explain this general comment about the positive thing from an experience I had when I was technical director for the men's gymnastics team in Canada. We had a high performance advisor who was a very successful coach, coached Olympic champions in synchronized swimming. And she would sometimes listen to the conversations that were happening between judges and coaches and gymnasts. And so much of it was critical of something like the organization of the competition or the judging, this kind of negative comment. And she said, why would you let the gymnast be there to hear those sorts of negative comments? All that is a distraction for them. If the gymnast is going to be talked about something and said something is going to be said to them, it should be something that will in some way build on their performance and help them to perform better. And she said, in my opinion, I don't see how listening to some negative discussion around the judging at a particular competition is going to help them compete better. In fact, it's a very negative thing for them to hear and perhaps could affect, if anything, their performance in a negative way. One thing I learned a great deal as a coach from was a really fantastic coach we had in Canada, Mr. Masaki Naosaki. And he always took some time to pause before he spoke with the gymnast to make sure that the way in which he spoke to the gymnast was very informative and positive in the feedback. It doesn't do the gymnast any good to know what they did wrong. What they need to do is what they need to do right the next turn. So just taking that time, reflecting on your answer for the gymnast or what you're going to say to that gymnast before you start to speak. I think sometimes we, as humans, it's our nature to speak before we think, and just to take some time to think about how you're going to speak to that gymnast so it comes across in a positive way and leads to growth.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that negative comments have a negative impact. So I think that creates an environment where everybody becomes positive. That is very, very important, especially as an organization. If you want to move towards one direction, I think that, working together is so important. So I strongly agree with your idea.
Thank you very much. That's nice to hear from you.
So in your presentation, you mentioned something like holistic well-being. So can you please elaborate any further? What does it mean by holistic?
Thank you again for another really good question. I'm very grateful you asked around that. Again, another big influence on my coaching and my philosophy is Dr. Keith Russell, who, of course, so many people watching this seminar will have had a course from Keith. with his remarkable personality and his remarkable knowledge. He said to me one time that we train tissue, but we coach people. And that simple expression meant a lot to me. We can follow a certain scientific program of an amount of training time, what exactly you do technically. But at the end of the day, we are working with human beings who have emotional and social needs, cognitive needs, are going through massive changes over their lifespan. We know, for example, that the teenagers have a very tough time. And coaching to me is not just this idea of training tissue, it's about helping that person develop into being the best human being they can be. Someone who feels extremely self-confident, who can take their experience from sport and use it to be in better relationships with other people, to be a very productive worker in their final career that they choose. Sport is one of the most, if not the most influential thing that a person can do in their life to shape them into who they will be. And with that responsibility as coaches, we have to imagine, what would I like this person to be like as an adult if I have them over to my house for dinner? And I think this is the holistic idea. At the end of it all, we help to shape somebody into being a wonderful human being who feels comfortable and confident in who they are.
That's a fantastic answer. That's the exact answer that I was looking for, because sometimes, historically speaking, that win at all cost culture did exist. So that wasn't really holistic approach in order to pursue the excellence, the well-being. That's more important than the results. That's my opinion. So exactly what you said was, my understanding of holistic well-being.
And thank you for, again, it's very reassuring for me to hear from someone of your coaching caliber that you agree with this philosophy. One thing I've heard from many coaches, they feel that they have been successful when they get invited to their gymnast weddings, when they get invited to be the godparent of one of their gymnast children. Then they say, that's successful. They have gone from being my athlete to being my friend. And this is for me, at the end of the day, how you should measure your success as a coach if your athletes still want to see you.
So that's all about today's webinar. And thank you very much again, Jeff Thomson, for your contribution. I really appreciate your time and effort. Thank you very much, and see you next time.